Paris, France, September 3rd, 2025. On the steps of the Élysée Palace, the French government gathered in what could be its final show of unity before facing a decisive confidence vote in the National Assembly. Prime Minister François Bayrou and his ministers had just concluded their last cabinet meeting, a moment heavy with symbolism and political uncertainty. The outcome of the upcoming parliamentary vote will determine whether this government survives or falls. The mood in the courtyard was solemn, even as ministers exchanged brief greetings and words with the press. Prime Minister François Bayrou, whose leadership has come under mounting scrutiny in recent weeks, walked out with Foreign Affairs Minister Jean-Noël Barrot at his side. Cameras followed their every movement, capturing what may be remembered as the closing scenes of Bayrou's fragile administration. The Prime Minister appeared calm but determined. Addressing reporters, François Bayrou said, "We are entering this moment with dignity and clarity. Our responsibility is to present ourselves before the representatives of the French people, knowing that the Assembly alone holds the power to confirm or reject our mandate." This statement underscored the stakes. The government's survival rests not on executive authority, but on parliamentary trust. One by one, ministers emerged from the palace, offering a tableau of France's political machinery bracing for impact. Bruno Retailleau, Minister of the Interior, followed Bayrou. His task in recent months has been to manage unrest and domestic pressures, from security threats to social tensions. He offered no words to the press, but his swift departure reflected the gravity of the moment. Laurent Marcangeli, in charge of public action and civil service, walked out next, his portfolio linked to the government's reform agenda. Close behind him was Sébastien Lecornu, the Armed Forces Minister, who has overseen delicate military operations abroad and faced difficult debates on defence spending. The parade of ministers continued. Manuel Valls, responsible for overseas territories, Sophie Primas, the government's spokesperson, and Gérald Darmanin, the Justice Minister. Their presence highlighted the breadth of policy issues now hanging in the balance should the government collapse. Darmanin, pausing briefly to speak, framed the moment bluntly. Gérald Darmanin said, "The confidence vote is not only about this cabinet, it is about whether France can maintain stability at a time when our institutions are tested and our people look for certainty." This was one of the clearest acknowledgements from within the government of the wider consequences of the vote. If the government falls, not only Bayrou, but the entire reform programme could unravel. Philippe Baptiste, Minister for Higher Education and Research, left the palace in the company of Deputy Trade Minister Véronique Louwagie. Their joint appearance was a reminder of the government's emphasis on balancing innovation with support for small businesses. François Rebsamen, Minister of Land Development, Valérie Létard, in charge of housing, and Sports Minister Marie Barsac also stepped into the camera's view. Each represents sectors directly tied to citizens' daily lives: housing, regional planning, and sports, making them particularly sensitive to political turbulence. Economy Minister Eric Lombard, seen leaving alongside Equality Minister Aurore Berger, is arguably at the heart of the storm. Financial markets have already signalled unease about political uncertainty. A loss in the Assembly could derail budget planning, debt management and economic reforms. Speaking later, Eric Lombard said, "Our economy cannot afford paralysis. Investors, employers and families need to know whether the country can take decisions in the weeks ahead." That clarity will come from the Assembly's vote. Marc Ferracci, Minister for Industry and Energy, appeared next, followed by Agnès Pannier-Runacher, in charge of ecological transition. Their portfolios represent some of the most contested reforms, particularly on green energy, carbon targets and industrial competitiveness. If the government loses its mandate, months of negotiation with unions and environmental groups could be swept aside. Rachida Dati, the Culture Minister, walked out together with Health Minister Yannick Noida and Transport Minister Philippe Tabarot. Their joint exit symbolised the broad scope of governance at stake: culture, health systems and transport networks, each crucial, each vulnerable to political collapse. The Cabinet's exit from the Élysée was more than a procedural moment. It was a visual reminder of how fragile the French government has become. Opinion polls suggest Bayrou's approval ratings have slipped, while opposition parties have seized on unpopular reforms and social discontent. The looming confidence vote is the culmination of weeks of tension. François Bayrou himself acknowledged the uncertainty with rare candour. François Bayrou said, "If we are rejected, we will accept the verdict with humility. But if we are confirmed, it must mean that France chooses stability over chaos. That framing is likely to be echoed throughout the government's final hours before the Assembly takes its decision. For opposition leaders, this moment represents an opportunity to force a political reset. Several parties, from the far left to the far right, have accused Bayrou of mismanaging reforms and alienating voters. Some have already announced they will push for immediate elections should the government lose. Meanwhile, inside the Assembly, lawmakers are preparing for a debate expected to be fierce and emotional. The vote could hinge on just a handful of deputies, making every alliance and abstention critical. Political analysts note that a fall of the Bayrou government could throw France into months of uncertainty. Coalition negotiations, caretaker arrangements, and even the possibility of snap elections could dominate the political calendar. As the final ministers departed the palace, the gravity of the day became unmistakable. The Élysée courtyard, usually a site of routine comings and goings, had turned into a stage for high drama. For Bayrou and his team, the hours ahead will determine whether their programme of reforms, from economic recovery to ecological transition, survives or collapses. The Assembly's verdict will not just decide a cabinet's future, it will test whether France's political system can navigate turbulence without breaking. Until then, the image remains fixed, ministers stepping into the Paris sunlight, a government standing together one last time before judgment falls.
Je vous appelle.